Have you ever heard of this phenomenon known as the uncanny valley? It's this concept of having an unsettling feeling when androids, like humanoid robots, and audiovisual simulations closely resemble humans in many respects, but are not quite convincingly realistic.
Between the mountains of safety and danger, there is a valley of creepiness where the limits of our knowledge and trust and security aren't very clear.
So what does this all have to do with the country of Latvia? Well, I spent about 4 days in the nation's capital, Riga, and it made me think that Latvia must feel like some kind of uncanny valley for Lithuanians. What do I mean by that? Well, just let me explain. Lithuania and Latvia are about as tight as any two nations can be. Sitting side by side geographically along the Baltic Sea, they're the only two countries still speaking Baltic languages and have a lot of shared common history. People from the two countries even have a term of endearment for one another, bralukas, which means brother, but in a form that is familiar and endearing. As someone who has now lived in Lithuania for a few years and has learned a bit of the language, it's my, theory, assertion, mere wondering, that visiting Latvia might feel like an uncanny valley for Lithuanians. By that I mean it closely resembles their homeland, but there are a few differences, just enough for it to feel weird. It's similar in so many ways, but still different. But it's not different enough to feel like you're technically in a different country with a different government and many different laws. You've traveled, but then you wonder if you've really gone anywhere. Now, let's be clear, I'm not a Lithuanian, and I'm not saying that this is how it should feel, but rather it was my own experience, and so I'm wondering if others, Lithuanians or Lithuanian residents, might feel the same. There are two big categories that I want to cover, language and culture. And then there's one crazy surprise at the end. But let's start with culture. Yeah, there is a lot of crossover. It's not surprising. The two countries are in the EU, so there are naturally a lot of union-wide standards that have been adopted. Electrical outlets, currency, etc. And then there are centuries of common history that also make the two countries quite similar. But I feel like if you're from Lithuania and taking a walk in Riga, you'll notice so many identical businesses. Just let me list what I saw during my time there. So just like Vilnius, there were Narvesen convenience stores everywhere. You're just never too far away from a Narvesen. When it comes to supermarkets, you'll see both Maxima and Rimi shops throughout the city. And many other stores need no explanation for Lithuanians, especially Vilnius residents, so I'll just list them out. Pepco, Sportland, Caffeine, Humana, Hesburger, and Eurovaistine, or should I say Euroapteka. And then, unsurprisingly, there are a few of those mega multinational fast food places like Subway, KFC, McDonald's, Burger King, but I don't really count those. Oh, I also saw a Ganbei Japanese restaurant, which I know Vilnius has a few of. And while 24-hour casinos and other gambling sites may not be the exact same, to me, Riga seemed to be littered with these businesses. So I imagine that seeing these on the streets of Riga would bring a sense of familiarity. No, it's not an earth-shattering revelation, but it's interesting that so many foundational parts of daily life, in terms of shopping and basic necessities, carry over from one country to the other. And then language is one other thing that I wanted to look at, mainly in terms of signage and advertisements, mostly because I didn't exactly talk to anyone in Latvian. As someone who has been trying to intentionally learn Lithuanian for the past year or so, I see Lithuanian-ish words everywhere. Draugas, which means friend in Lithuanian, is draugs in Latvian. Laime, happiness, is, well, laime. And then there are quite a few fruits with similar names as well. And the Lithuanian word for world, pasaulis, is pasaulė. And the list just goes on and on. I even noticed a few verbs conjugate similarly. Let's take the verb to be as an example. In Lithuanian, it's aš esu, tu esi, ji, jis yra, mes esame, jūs esate. In Latvian, it's es esmu, tu esi, viņš, vina ir, mes esam, jūs esat. All but one set of conjugations seem to be quite similar. I don't know how many other verbs have similarities, but that one was so clear to me when looking at signage. So I do have to wonder what else Lithuanian speakers are noticing that I'm not seeing myself. And well, it's just those two big things that, to me, make Riga feel more similar to Vilnius than any other city would. But I stumbled on one more crazy similarity, or I guess coincidence. Lithuanians will know January 13th as the day in 1991 that 14 civilians were killed and over 140 were injured. This was when Lithuanians stood up against a Soviet attempt to take over key parts of Vilnius infrastructure after the Lithuanian government declared its independence from the Soviet Union. This day isn't an official holiday, but Lithuanians, including government officials, annually commemorate the event every year on January 13th with ceremonies and speeches. So I was quite surprised to be sitting on a tram in Riga and hear that the next stop was called something like January 13th Street. I don't remember what it was exactly, but perhaps something like Trispadsmitais Janvaris. I know some countries like to name streets and squares that are meaningful after other friendly countries, like how Vilnius has a Washington Square, or Washington Aikštė, and Riga has a Washingtona Laukums. Vilnius has a Rygos Gatvė, or Riga Street, while Riga also has a Vilnius Iela, or Vilnius Street. With this in mind, I thought that maybe Riga was paying respect to what happened in Vilnius on January 13th, 1991. But this actually isn't the case. I've since learned that Riga had its own January 13th event all the way back in 1905. On this day, peaceful demonstrators squared off with Russian military forces near the river Daugava. The website inyourpocket.com states that shots were fired and panic ensued, and that some demonstrators were killed by bullets while others fell through the ice in the river and drowned. At least 70 died and another 200 were injured. While the Riga incident was also at the hands of Russian soldiers, the reasons were a little different. The demonstration that started it was a form of solidarity with workers that had been killed in St. Petersburg on January 9th after protesting government reform. It's so wild. 2 different days in history taking place on the same day of the year with also quite a few parallels. So to me, that was probably the craziest coincidence while I was in Riga. But anyways, since most of my audience is Lithuanian, I wanted to ask those who have been to Latvia what your feeling is. As nice as Riga and the rest of the country must be, is there an uncanny valley vibe to it all? Or am I completely off? Do let me know by leaving a comment. And so for the Lithuanian word of the day, let's just go with the word keista, which translates to uncanny or strange. Keista. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.